I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. Could we be looking at a coming end of evangelical support for Israel? How real is this danger as the Hate Israel movement called BDS grows? Today, we'll expose the growing number of Christians and Christian churches that have joined this worldwide movement to destroy the Jewish state. Hello, I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, President and founder of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and sharing the message of Christian biblical responsibility to the people and land of Israel against the rise of a global genocidal anti-Semitism. I've come to realize that Israel is facing threats from nearly every corner, from Iran's nuclear weapons program, from terrorist groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and now ISIS. I also saw how much of the world opposes the Jewish state, from the UN to the European countries and to every one of Israel's neighbors. With threats and hatred spreading from every corner, it seems we're heading closer to the biblical prophecy of Armageddon in the Middle East. This wildfire of global hatred toward the Jewish state is now growing at an alarming rate. A recent ADL global study on anti-Semitism found that more than a quarter of the world's population harbors intense anti-Jewish sentiment. That translates to 1.1 billion people, even though 70% of those queried have never met a Jew. Mainstream media and educational campaigns continue to beat the drum against Israel with weak to little response. This hatred has now organized into a global movement called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or simply BDS. The BDS campaign uses economic and political pressure on Israel to force it to comply with the stated goals of the movement. The campaign was started in 2005 by 171 Palestinian non-governmental organizations in support of the Palestinian cause for boycott, divestment, and international sanctions against Israel. Citing a body of UN resolutions and specifically echoing the anti-apartheid campaigns against South Africa, the BDS campaign called for various forms of boycott against Israel until it meets its obligations under international law. The march of companies, celebrities, organizations, churches, and others that have been persuaded through disinformation and strong-arm tactics to join this parade grows daily. Bottom line, the BDS movement promotes the delegitimization of Israel with the unstated goal: eliminate the state of Israel utterly and completely. Now, even supposed Bible-believing Christians have bought into this hate fest. Many hang their disgust of Israel based on a theology of love thy neighbor. Since Israel has not granted the impoverished Palestinians a state and has not given more land for peace, the Jewish country is guilty of the sin of hatred and of not turning the other cheek. Also, many Christians fall prey to the age-old lie called replacement theology, as they believe that Christians have replaced the Jews in the covenant and that God did not give the land to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob forever. Unfortunately, replacement teachings and years of grassroots efforts by Israel's critics is beginning to bear fruit in the Christian world. More and more Christians are turning against the Jewish state and are joining the BDS movement, even ignoring potential serious consequences to themselves should radical Muslims gain power within any country. Numerous left-leaning churches joined this movement, including the Presbyterian Church USA, the British Methodist Church, and the United Methodist Church, with others highly considering it. Evidence is now emerging that these anti-Israel Christians are succeeding in reaching beyond the evangelical left and are influencing the mainstream evangelicals by penetrating the millennial generation of 18 to 30-year-olds. Anti-Israel Jews, Muslims, and various Christian denominations are pouring money and organizational assets into influencing the millennial generation so that the future of evangelicals' relations with Israel will be changed in favor of the Palestinian cause. In February of 2014, a Gallup poll found that while about 70% of Americans support a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, only about 30% of American students do so. This gap between the values and beliefs of the millennial generation and those of its elders cannot be dismissed. In numerous surveys, millennials have expressed solidarity with the Palestinians and infuriation with Israel. This signals a seismic shift in the American church and a serious threat to Israel's greatest area of support. This disdain for Israel among evangelicals and others threatens all of us by giving credence to forces who want to do us great harm on their way to establishing a new Islamic caliphate. It's hard to believe, but more Christian leaders of this generation are moving toward neutrality, while others are becoming outspoken critics of Israel. Questioning Christian support for the Jewish state is fast becoming a key way for millennials to demonstrate Christian compassion. But where is their compassion and protest for the children of Arab Palestinians who are encouraged to become martyrs, killing Jews, Christians, and infidels, one of the worst child abuse practices in history? The big question I must ask these Christians is, how can someone of conviction in his heart come against a people in covenant with the God of the Bible? When God said forever in Genesis, He meant forever. In the media world, we know that the mainstream outlets continue to side with the Palestinian narrative of Israeli occupation and demonize Israel. We can now add Christian media to that list, as it has become a powerful and strategic tool in the war against Israel. Fighting back in the media is not an option. The need for pro-Israel voices to rise up outside of the Jewish community is critical for Jews, Christians, and the rest of the free world. In the end, all freedom-loving people must understand that Israel's battle against radical Islam is their battle as well.
Any comments on Israel?
Tell them to get the hell out of Palestine.
Ooh.
These people are occupied.
The land that belongs to the Palestinians, not the Israelis.
The unitary state winds up either being an apartheid state.
We need to separate ourselves from Israel. It's a cancer on American foreign policy.
We believe that Israel is an apartheid state.
This Israel is an apartheid state thing.
The American Studies Association voted to endorse a boycott of Israel's academic institutions.
Or randomly shoot a bunch of folks in a deli in Paris.
In the occupied territories, Palestinian land, that there is a horrendous example of apartheid.
All right, stop. I can only take so much of politicians on an empty stomach. Listen, this is God's comic Brad Stein, and I know what you're thinking. Why in the world would you be making a movie about Israel and you as a comedian? Isn't Israel an important, serious topic? It is. But if you look at our culture and who's most affecting our culture, guess what? It's not theologians. It's not even politicians. It's Bill Maher's. It's Jon Stewart's. It's the comedians who know how to take hard subjects and deliver them with a little spoonful of sugar. And so, as a man who's known to speak as a comic from the right, it's our turn. Yeah! I hope you'll join me, because it's going to be a fun journey of discovery as we go looking for Israel, that mysterious, biblical, famous land of apartheid? Yeah, Israel. the world's greatest boogeyman. Why, they're worse than North Korea, Iran, and Sudan combined. Just ask the United Nations.
What do you got?
Are you laughing yet? Well, when you find out about the ridiculous, ludicrous, and let's face it, sometimes downright hateful claims against this simple little land the Jews built, well, I promise you're going to find some laughs.
That's right, Brad. And here's even more fun information about this new film.
Huh? Where did the voice go?
Global hatred toward the Jewish state continues to grow at an alarming rate. This hatred has now organized and consolidated into a global movement called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or simply BDS. BDS is a global campaign echoing the anti-apartheid crusade against South Africa and calls for various forms of boycott against Israel until it meets its obligations under international law. Bottom line, the BDS movement promotes the delegitimization of Israel with the unstated goal: eliminate the state of Israel utterly and completely. Alarmingly, many supposed Bible-believing Christians have bought into this hate fest. Evidence is emerging that anti-Israel Jews, Muslims, and various Christian denominations are pouring money and assets into influencing the millennial generation. This signals a seismic shift in the American church and a serious threat to Israel's greatest area of support. The fight to regain this lost ground must not be delayed any longer. It's hard to rationalize just how anyone of a sane mind would want to see Israel commit national suicide. And how could such a person also espouse Christian values and deny that they are anti-Semitic? When you unmask the double standards of the BDS movement, the hypocrisy of those who want to boycott Israel is sad and humorous at the same time.
Hey, big voice guy, back off. This is my gig. Now listen. Looking for this apartheid stuff in Israel? It's not going to be easy, but somebody's got to do it. And for those of you who are saying, why should I care about Israel? I guarantee you, when this documentary's through, you won't not be able to care about Israel. It's too important in this day and age. So watch for it. It's coming soon. Trust me. I'm a comedian.
It is hard to rationalize just how anyone of a sane mind would want to create another radical Muslim country and see Israel commit national suicide. And how could such a person also espouse Christian values and deny that they are anti-Semitic? Israel is still one of the world's freest countries and the only true and thriving democracy in the Middle East. It has a true freedom of religion that allows every voice to be heard and has one of the highest standards of human rights. Israel is a country that has given back to the world greatly and in many ways. It has taken a people with resilience and determination to turn the dream of a Jewish state into a reality. The BDS movement's strange inversion of reality holds Israel responsible for the aggression against them and characterizes Israel as a brutal oppressor. In their mixed-up world, they believe that if a second state was created in Judea and Samaria, that it would not become a terrorist hellhole bent on the destruction of Israel. What would be the result if Israel actually complied with the demands of the BDS movement? What would the two-state solution actually look like? How would this spell the end of Israel? Do the Arabs truly want to live in peace and accept a two-state solution? How could we not see that this proposed Palestinian nation would become like all the surrounding Arab nations of the region? Despotic, oppressive, faction-ridden, and violent. BDS also demands the right of return of Palestinian refugees to their homes and properties in Israel. This would spell suicide for the Jewish state. Why should 5 million Jews who have created their own nation in accordance with their ancient culture and tradition and in accordance with the international law allow itself to be swamped by millions of Arabs who have proven over decades that they reject their presence and aim to destroy them? Arabs don't hate Jews because of Israel. They hate Israel because of the Jews. Jew and Christian hatred is mandated by the Quran and is preached in the mosques and taught to the children in Arab countries day in and day out, generation after poison generation, results in a population that is a slave to its own hatred. Where else does a mother celebrate the death of her child to kill Jews? The leader of Hezbollah has publicly stated that he will not be happy until every Jew on earth is dead. The hypocrisy of those who purport to boycott Israel is actually very sad and humorous at the same time when you unmask the double standards of the BDS movement. PJTN's next major documentary will expose the BDS movement for what it is, another anti-Semitic solution to eliminate the state of Israel utterly and completely.
Those who hate the free and democratic state of Israel have dreamed up yet another way to try to destroy it. It has an innocuous name, but not an innocuous purpose. It's called the BDS Movement. The initials stand for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. Created by Palestinian academics, it calls on individuals, on companies, on colleges, churches, cities, and even countries to starve Israel economically and isolate it socially. The ostensible reason for this is Israel's alleged mistreatment of Palestinians living in the areas of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Now, I support the idea of the creation of a Palestinian state. Actually, so do most Israelis. And I'm not particularly supportive of the West Bank settlement policy of the Israeli government. But I condemn the BDS movement in the strongest possible terms. Anyone who has any interest in creating a climate for peace in the Middle East should also condemn the BDS movement, as should anyone who simply understands the immorality of singling out Israel of all the world's countries for economic strangulation. Here's why. First, the BDS movement ignores historical reality. You don't have to delve too deeply into late 20th century history to learn that Israel gained control over the West Bank only after it had been attacked by Jordan in the 1967 Six-Day War. No attack by Jordan, no Israel in the West Bank. It's as simple as that. Furthermore, Israel, on at least two separate occasions, most recently in both 2000 and 2008, has tried to give almost all of the land it acquired in 1967 in the West Bank back to the Palestinians. It's the Palestinians who've rejected each of these offers. In other words, there's no need for the BDS movement, since Israel wants to give the Palestinians their own country. Israel only asks to be able to live in peace in return. Second, the BDS movement ignores current reality. Israel is one of the freest countries in the world, and by far the freest in the Middle East, an area where there's precious little freedom. In a world full of human rights violators of the most blatant kind, why would you want to boycott a country that has a boisterous free press, is a model of women's and gay rights, and whose Arab citizens, 1/5 of the country, are the freest in the Arab world? Let me repeat, the Arab citizens of Israel, who make up 1/5 of Israel's population, are freer than all Arabs living in Arab countries around the world. Now, the common sense principle of human rights is deal with the worst first. By this principle, there should be BDS movements against North Korea, against Syria, against Sudan, or a dozen other countries. Israel wouldn't even make the list. Of course, Israel has flaws, but like all vibrant democracies with regular elections and functioning courts of law, it makes a constant effort to correct them. Let's not forget that Israel did not build a security fence on the border of the West Bank or establish checkpoints because it wanted to keep hard-working Palestinians out of Israel. It did these things because it wanted to keep terrorists out of Israel after enduring years of horrific suicide bombings following the peace talks that the Palestinians rejected in 2000. Third, the BDS movement makes peace much less likely. Why? Because the Palestinians, if they believe that the BDS movement can strangle Israel economically and make it an international pariah, why should they ever negotiate? Why not just wait until Israel has no choice but to capitulate? But the BDS movement doesn't just hurt Israel, it hurts everyone. Israeli scientists and engineers are leading innovators in the fields of medical technology, in the fields of renewable energy, water conservation. The BDS movement wants to keep these scientists, as well as Israeli historians and other academics, from sharing their innovations and their knowledge and their insights with the world, with you. But the BDS activists don't care about helping the world. They care about hurting Israel. This leads to one final issue that has to be confronted: the motives of the people behind the BDS movement. Here, those tempted to support this movement must be very careful. The leaders of the BDS movement have no interest in a two-state solution. They reject the concept of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. The BDS movement deliberately fools people. It claims to be opposed only to Israel's settlement policy, when in fact it's opposed to Israel's very existence. You may have sympathy for the Palestinians and wish to help them. I share that sympathy. But by aligning yourself with the BDS movement, you are aligning yourself with people who don't want to see both sides thrive. They want to see one side, Israel, destroyed. They don't really want to see a change in policy. They want to see an end to the nation state of the Jewish people. Do you want to spend your time and moral energy supporting such a cause? For decent people, the answer is no. I'm Alan Dershowitz, professor of law at Harvard University for Prager University.
What would happen if a person or company actually followed through on a boycott of Israeli goods and creations? What of the many Israeli innovations and philanthropic projects that have impacted and continue to impact the lives of people around the world? Israel is fulfilling its biblical mandate to be a light to the nations on a daily basis in many areas and endeavors by making life better for all the world, including Arabs. Judaism demands a commitment to pursue justice and repair the world, and Jewish history teaches every Jew to respect and fight for the rights of others. Israel makes the world a better place not only through tremendous innovations, but also through philanthropy and missions work, and is truly changing the world for the better. Through hard work and determination, this desert nation is a global leader in renewable energy, agricultural innovation, and medical breakthroughs that improve quality of life all over the world. Some of the world's most important inventions and innovations that include much life-altering work originate in Israel. Advances in various technologies, such as robotic spinal surgery, desalting the ocean, and the computer flash drive, were born in Israel. Israel truly is the little country that changed the world, saving and improving lives around the world every day.
My name is Shachal Zahavi. I'm the founder of IsraAid, which is an Israeli coalition of 15 Israeli and Jewish NGOs that provide humanitarian aid to developing countries. We've been involved for the past 10 years in disaster relief situations, complex emergencies, wars, natural disasters. I think that the interesting thing that we're trying to convey both in Israel and to the international community is In order to help communities like this, you have to be first on the ground. You have to be immediately there. You have to be a part of the community.
Within 48 hours of last week's quake, 2 747s arrived in Port-au-Prince from Israel. One loaded with medical supplies and the other with personnel, here to create the best field medicine available.
I think what drives us as Israelis and makes us successful as humanitarian aid workers is that we're innovative, we care about people, and we have the skills to provide the assistance. And this is something that's very unique. The Jewish value of tikkun olam and about giving to the other, it's something that's already rooted into our history. It's something that is part of us. It's something that you bring from your family, from your tradition. That's the Jewish sensitivity, the closeness, the family. That's what we are all about.
Well, that's our show for today. And I hope you realize that the time to stand up is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your elected officials. Let your leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive free newsletters, action alerts, daily blogs, and order our films to share with family and friends. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.